white, a blank page or canvas, his favorite. So many possibilities. These are the words spoken before the orchestra's final majestic chords, ending Sunday in the Park with George, the 1984 Pulitzer Prize-winning musical by Stephen Sondheim. They echo the very first words spoken by George at the beginning of the first act. So many possibilities. Our theme this month is reimagining possibilities, and as many of you know, iconic Broadway composer and lyricist Stephen Sondheim died at the age of 91, exactly 1 month ago today. Reinventing the musical theater genre several times, he, like George, reimagined possibilities. Knowing my sermon next week would be one honoring some of those influential people that we lost in 2021, I realized it could easily be overtaken by thoughts about my favorite composer and lyricist. So I decided to single him out this week by revisiting one of his shows that has provided me with so many possibilities for themes, for speeches and sermons. Sunday in the Park with George. Now, I imagine many of you enjoy rereading your favorite books and rewatching your favorite movies and listening again and again to your favorite music. I also imagine you sometimes discover something in those that you didn't catch or recognize the first time or even the 10th time. Part of that is because we are, it is hoped, different people with a different lived experience by the time we revisit these works. The other thing is that really good works of art have layers and depth that allow us to continue to come to new realizations each time. So, I'm going to unfold some of the themes I've talked about in the past, as well as some new things I've come to appreciate lately about Sunday in the Park with George. But before I do that, I'll give a bit of background about the musical and the painting that the plot of the musical is based on. But don't worry if you're not particularly a fan of either musicals or art history. I think you'll still find things to think about in my remarks. A Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, painted in 1884, is George Seurat's most famous work. The composition, a leading example of the pointillist technique, includes a number of Parisians at a park on an island in the River Seine. When Seurat began the painting in 1884, the island was a bucolic retreat far from the urban center. Exactly 100 years later, in 1984, Stephen Sondheim's musical Sunday in the Park with George opened on Broadway. Inspired by the painting, the plot revolves around George, a fictionalized version of Seurat, who immerses himself deeply in painting his masterpiece, which prominently features his longtime mistress, Dot. In the second act, George's great-grandson, also named George, interacts with his grandmother, Marie, who is Dot's daughter. In an analysis of the work, Scott Miller writes, Sunday in the Park with George sits precariously on the edge between traditional plot-driven musicals and the concept musicals developed mostly by Stephen Sondheim and director Hal Prince. Like concept musicals, Sunday explores an idea more than telling a story, and yet it does still tell a story. The difference is that the exposition and conflicts are established in the 1880s, but the resolution comes 100 years later to a protagonist who is a different man and yet the same. Many years ago, I gave a well-received Toastmaster speech titled Children and Art, based on one of the themes in Sunday in the Park with George. In the second act of the show, the modern-day George finds himself alone with his grandmother, Marie, in a gallery. On the wall hangs his great-grandfather's masterpiece. Marie, who considers the painting a sort of family tree on canvas, knows she needs very much to communicate something important to George before she passes. She sings the lovely tune, Children and Art. She has remarked earlier that there are two worthwhile things to leave behind when you die, children and art. In that same speech, I remarked, not only are children and art two worthwhile things to leave behind, they are also two things people have very vocal opinions about. People who haven't attempted anything artistic since elementary school will proclaim how the creator of a certain sculpture or painting is either a gifted genius or incompetent idiot based on the clear evidence before them. Likewise, people who have never had children, those who have never so much as babysat or taught RE, seem to have no end of opinions on how other parents should benefit from their sage advice on how to raise more well-behaved and successful children. But despite the probability that their artistic talent or parenting skills will be called into question, people continue to create art and have children. Why? Perhaps out of love, of art, of beauty, of children, of family. We are compelled to, but also because we want people to remember that we have lived. Marie sings, there are only two worthwhile things to leave behind when you depart this world of ours, children and art. By the end of the song, George begins to understand. He says to himself, connect, George, connect. And indeed, the overriding theme of this particular work, like some of Sondheim's others, is connection. George is presented with a lesson, one that takes 3 generations and 100 years to learn. Like the lead characters in other Sondheim shows, such as Robert and Company, Frank and Merrily We Roll Along, and Fosca and Passion, George's great lesson is to learn to connect. But before that connection is heralded by orchestral and choral harmony at the end of the show, we have characters musing on immortality. I imagine the message in many other churches this morning, in churches that are creedal, not covenantal, links the story of the birth of a baby with salvation and eternal life. I've often talked about how our faith tradition is covenantal, not creedal, meaning it's built on relationships and our covenants about our relationships and our connections to one another and the divine, however you define the divine. It's not about our creeds and what we believe, especially about salvation and the afterlife. In the opening number of the musical, Dot sings not only about connection, but about her image living long after she does. If you want instead, when you're dead, some more public and more permanent expression of affection, you want a painter, poet, sculptor, preferably marble, granite, bronze, durable. Something nice with swans that's durable forever. I imagine most of us think about what will live on after us. Perhaps our children, perhaps our artwork. The Sunday after Sondheim died, the Broadway community gathered in Times Square to remember the legendary lyricist and composer by singing the finale from Sunday in the Park with George. During the gathering, Lin-Manuel Miranda read a reference to the show from Sondheim's memoir, Look, I Made a Hat. He read, once during the writing of each show, I cry at a notion, a word, a chord, a melodic idea, an accompaniment figure. In this show, it was the word forever in Sunday. I was suddenly moved by the contemplation of what these people would have thought if they'd known they were being immortalized and in a major way, in a great painting. I still cry when I think about it, but then I cry at Animal Planet, often. George and Dot, forever. Each is concerned with making their mark, of doing something important or meaningful. Dot makes her connection to posterity through relationships. George enters vicariously into the lives of the people he sketches, singing their songs with them to make art that lives forever. The song Children and Art underscores how their approaches to life are complementary. Their story naturally deals with vision, connection, and mortality. But try as she might, Dot is unable to make the connection she needs with George. She realizes she needs the security that a different kind of man can provide. She leaves George for Louis, a baker, because he makes an effort to understand her. Not only does Louis not have either the talent or passion of George, what he produces is the most temporal of arts, while George's is more long-lasting. She sings, Louis is really an artist. Louis's cakes are an art. Louis isn't the smartest. Louis is popular. Everybody loves Louis. Louis bakes from the heart. Not that Louis is perfection. That's what makes him ideal. Hardly anything worth objection. Louis drinks a bit. Louis blinks a bit. Louis makes a connection. That's the thing that you feel. Dot needs that security and wants that connection because she's about to give birth to a child. That child is Marie, who will sing Children and Art in the second act. Two worthwhile things to leave behind when you die, she claims. Children and art. When I revisited this theme in a previous sermon, I began to think there may be two other ways children and art may serve people in this world. As catalysts for changing our worldview. Not the only ways, certainly, but perhaps two of the most effective. In our reading, the artist Anne Truitt described the epiphany that altered the course of her life. The tip of balance from the physical to the conceptual in art had set me to thinking about my life in a whole new way. What did I know, I asked myself? What did I love? What was it that meant the very most to me inside my very own self? The fields and trees and fences and boards and lattices of my childhood rushed across my inner eye as if borne by a great strong wind. I saw them all, detail and panorama, and my feeling for them welled up to sweep me into the knowledge that I could make them. I knew that that was exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. Sometimes it takes a dramatic event with a child or a close family member to change the way we look at things. The 2007 documentary For the Bible Tells Me So tells the story of families and their struggles dealing with gay and lesbian children. The film delves into homosexuality and its perceived conflict with Christianity, as well as various interpretations of what the Bible says about same-sex sexuality. The worldviews of several sets of parents were changed because of the love of their children. But the one that really hit me was the story of Mary Lou Wallner, who was raised in a fundamentalist, legalistic church environment. She was taught that being gay was a sin. When her lesbian daughter reached out to her, she made it clear that while she loved her, she could not accept her. After moving off to college, her daughter committed suicide in February of 1997. Thunderstruck, Mary Lou Wallner read everything she could about homosexuality and eventually came around to her place of acceptance. Her worldview was changed, although too late for her daughter to know or appreciate that fact. Mary Lou Wallner and her husband Bob are now strong allies of the GLBT community. According to their website, they have a sincere desire to see the church accept and welcome GLBT people just the way God made them. And they spearhead a weekly Bible study in their home for GLBT Christians. Children and art, two things that may compel us to re-examine our way of looking at the world. Two worthwhile things to leave behind. But all of this is because of our connections to children, to our family, to friends, to others through art, music, drama, literature. Connections to one another and to posterity through relationships or through art that lives on after us. And those connections are, of course, what so many of us still find difficult today, with 24/7 distractions, ever-increasing demands on our time, and pressure to be ever more productive. But, as the show suggests, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's a show about our inability to sustain relationships, a show about juggling a career with a relationship, and a show about art and commerce. When Sondheim and book writer James Lapine were trying to figure out how to approach a musical based on the painting, Lapine wondered why no one in the painting is looking at anyone else. And this was before cell phones and iPads. Seurat's canvas catches people in the midst of living their lives, coming and going through a park. Perhaps the modern equivalent would be Herman Park or a downtown street corner. The characters portrayed on the canvas compel George and Dot, and in turn us, to think hard about our connections to others. An actual street corner in real life did that in 1958 for a Trappist monk and mystic. Thomas Merton was a member of the Abbey of Our Lady of Gethsemane near Bardstown, Kentucky. He wrote, "In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. The sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being a man, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me, now I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this. But it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun." Our faith tradition talks about a respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Our lives are covenantal, built on relationships, our connections to one another, our connections to friends, family, and children, our connections made through music, theater, and art. Children and art. Two things that may compel us to re-examine our way of looking at the world. Two very worthwhile things to leave behind. As we enter into a new year, may we love more, create more, connect more. A new year, like a new beginning. White, a blank page or canvas. So many possibilities.